Let's talk.
John Brown.
The Hiroshima Men, the quest to build the atomic bomb, and the fateful decision to use it. We are coming up to the 80th anniversary to the end of the Second World War, VJ Day, of course, but that is marked or marred, depending on how you look at it, by the attack, the atomic attack on the Japanese port city of Hiroshima. It is the subject of the Hiroshima Men, the new book by Iain MacGregor. I'm delighted to say that Iain MacGregor joins me live on the line now. Iain, good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. You would think that people have had enough of atomic weapons. We've had the film Oppenheimer out. We are going to, as I said before, the celebrations or the anniversary of the 80th of the end of the war in Japan. Why is the Hiroshima Men such an important book? Why are we looking at this and going over this again, please, Iain?
It's funny. Well, I'm glad you said Oppenheimer, because when I was deep in the research for this, I was thinking that it's a great movie. Obviously, it won a lot of awards, great acting. CGI is amazing of the test, the Trinity test, the famous one. But at no time do you see, you don't really have any Japanese voices in the film. You don't actually see what the bomb does, do you? You don't see what it's done to the city. You just see that scene where he's coming through the audience of the scientists sitting in that basketball court in slow motion where they're all going crazy, and Oppenheimer's there kind of dumbstruck, wondering what's going on. It's very dramatic. It's not true, but it's very dramatic. It's a classic thing of, it's good to try and tell another generation of the birth of atomic energy, atomic weapons, the danger of radiation poisoning, through the very first time it was used in history, which is obviously, as you said, Hiroshima. And you can only really do that, I think, by still interviewing those that were on either dropped it or on the end of it. And that was what I wanted to do, because as you know, you were saying you love history. I mean, most of the people I interviewed were between 85 and 101 years old. And they're not going to be around for much longer. So their stories, their voices, on both sides, are peppered through the narrative. And what I wanted to do, it's not just about the war, and it's not just about dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. I'm trying to give the reader a 20-year story arc of the race for the bomb, the war itself, how the war and the way it was fought in the Pacific meant no weapons off the table on both sides. How both sides felt about each other, and it was, it's very racial in its content, and not just the bomb being dropped, but then how do you and I know what radiation poisoning does? How do we know that how terrible a war with atomic bombs could be? It's because it was first reported by the man in my book, John Hersey.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is, of course, that this is 20, because I always say, and the listeners will be, hitting their heads, nothing exists in a vacuum. And one of the things about the Second World War is it turbocharges scientific development to such an extent. If you think that if you go into the Second World War, for example, with Germany, who everybody thinks, it's blitzkrieg, it's mechanized, but people are going in with horse-drawn, gun carriages. Yeah. And you end up with jet propulsion and atomic weapons. And that's a 6-year arc. So this just shows, but there is, Nazi in Europe in the 1920s and 1930s, and especially in Germany, scientists are rock stars. They are rock stars. Yes. Walter van Braach, obviously, who goes on to basically put a man on the moon. And so there is this huge investment in this in technology, and that is always one of the worrying what ifs. And the Nazis did have a dirty atomic weapon, which they let loose at one point on some poor, unfortunate sort of Polish, prisoners of war.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, that's what you just said it. It's that's what drives in the first 2-3 years of the Manhattan Project coming into existence. The need to get. I mean, it's amazing when you think they built an atomic bomb in 3 years, just 3.5 years maybe, and that's driven by the fear that the Nazis would have it first. And it does. It's touched upon in Oppenheimer, the film, in terms of once a lot of the Oppenheimer's team at Los Alamos realized Germany's completely out of the war, there's no way they could be building a bomb. There's a pushback on, well, why do we need to use it? Because we know we're eventually going to win the war in the Pacific, which is too strong for them. But you're right in terms of it's just, that's what I try and capture in the book. It's the leaps in engineering, chemistry, physics, atomic technology, aerodynamics across war drives that. I mean, I talk about the bomb, but one of the things I really talk about in detail is, 40 years before, when the Wright brothers were flying a plane made of balsa wood, string and cotton, you've got the B-29 Superfortress that can fly up to 40,000 feet and the crew survived because it's the first pressurized cabin. It's got computerized gun system. It's got the most up-to-date bomb sight, the Northern bomb sight. And it can carry payloads with engines that can take it on a 3,000 kilometer journey. It's just incredible. And that's designed, built, and online and being used within about 6 years. It's incredible.
The other thing is when you write about history is because, spoiler alert, we know how it ends. But when I bang this point into people all the time, we're looking back, we know how it ends. If you're sitting there in 1944 and you just hit mainland Europe and you know the Germans are out, the Nazis are out of the war, you don't know that the war is going to end. Well, you think the war might be over by Christmas in Germany. But unfortunately, they dig in and this is Europe. There's a huge loss of life unnecessary. Yeah. If the Germans had just gone, okay, we're out, tens of thousands would have been killed. Now, we know how that. If you're in the Pacific, so the war ends, and they are training. American troops are getting retrained to go over and fight in the Pacific. Nimitz has got the biggest naval force ever assembled, and they're fighting through the home island. MacArthur's gone off on his little sort of joyride because he's got personal business to set in the Philippines. But you've got Iwo Jima. Yeah, you've had the other islands, and then you get the horror show, which is now 80 years ago, of Okinawa. And that is the first, and 300,000, at a small guess are killed in that, in one of the bloodiest campaigns. And there are human shields. There are people with bombs strapped to them. It is a nightmare campaign. And the Americans go, we're not even at, that's not even a home island. If we get to Japan, we could lose 1 million men here. And they're running out of manpower.
But you got to think about the conflicting commanders in charge of various arms of the American armed forces. They're all like the Russian generals were competing who's going to get to Berlin. There's competition between the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Army Air Force. It would be the Air Force, but for now it's the U.S. Army Air Force. They're all competing as in who can deliver the knockout blow and bring surrender to Japan, because obviously it pays dividends in the post-war rebuilding reassignment of the American military. Hap Arnold, who's in charge of the Air Force, or Army Air Force, he's convinced, always had been convinced, it would be the bomber that would bring Japan to its knees. Nimitz, as you'd say, the Navy, he's thinking, we can do the blockade. The blockade will starve the country into societal collapse. And then MacArthur is pushing for, my boys can take the island. All the while, as you know, because you mentioned Okinawa, they had 60, 70,000 casualties just from Okinawa. And they're being told, Truman in the White House is being told there's going to be over 1 million casualties within the first 6 months of Operation Olympic. So that's where we're at. And it's you look at the data, you look at who was saying what at the time. And again, as you said, hindsight's a great thing. But if you're the guy on the ground and you're looking at several thousand servicemen being killed in the Pacific every week, and the Japanese still aren't surrendering, there's still absolute carnage of bloodshed going on in the Philippines and in mainland China. Chinese lost 15 million people fighting the Japanese. 1.2 million Japanese troops are still in China. And they're thinking, well, they're showing every sign that they are going to go down to the bitter end. What can we do? So, there's no good decision. It's just a bad decision. Either way you go is a bad decision.
And also you've lost Roosevelt. So Truman's come in and he's got no idea. He's got no idea. I admire him. I really, really admire Truman, because I think he was a very good politician before he got that gig anyway. He'd been part of the oversight committee on American military spending before and during the war. Roosevelt, being the kind of character he was, kept his vice president in the dark. Most presidents do keep their vice presidents in the dark. So this is a guy that inherits not just the fighting in Europe, the fighting in the Pacific, how to deal with the big three, Stalin and Churchill, and then, by the way, we've got this wonder weapon we've been working on in top secret that you know nothing about. And Truman's an ex-artillery officer from the Great War who appreciates the power of the explosive.
if someone's telling him we've got one bomb that can deliver 20,000 tons of TNT, that he would probably grasp at that and think he's not thinking radiation poisoning. We do, because we've got hindsight of 80 years. He doesn't. I haven't seen any archive material where he has a serious debate about any kind of radiation consequences once the bomb's been dropped. I think he's just looking to end the war quickly. Because
they've done the United States Army Air Force has done these horrendous sort of firebombing rates, isn't it, on Tokyo most famously, razing it to the ground. So what sort of, because we're saying because we tended to always look at this from a Western perspective. And as we will see in Vietnam some 20 years later, there's the infamous quote about, the life doesn't really matter that much to the Vietnamese as it does to Europeans. Completely racist. And maybe history has looked at the Japanese as these sort of faceless sort of kamikaze types. But you're looking, but there are Japanese, even in Okinawa, who want to save their men and don't see the pointless loss of life. And there are Japanese, they're not automat, they're not robots. So you've looked at the situation perhaps leading up to that, and because they obviously have no idea what's about to quote unquote hit them, is there?
No, not weirdly, but their intelligence had warned them that the Americans had the B-29. So before the B-29 made its first sorties over Japan, the Japanese knew it was coming. But they had assumed that the Americans, right at the start of the war, but even before Pearl Harbor, they just assumed the Americans wouldn't have the commitment and the ability to accept such losses to get them to a position where they're parked 1,400 kilometers off the home islands, and therefore they'd be in reach of the bombers. They never knew they just didn't believe they would be bombed by American bombers like they were. So very few air raid shelters built in Japanese cities, not much investment in fire crews and the medical facilities you'll need. And so when these waves of B-29s are coming from the Marianas Islands, they reduce 66 Japanese cities almost to ashes, dehouse 8.5 million of them, kill 1 million of them, almost 1 million of them. And then once that's done, then they're dropping sea mines around the home islands to stop supplies getting in. Operation Starvation, lovely name. And then they stop bombing the rice crops. So societal collapse would have happened. But I suppose there is the argument, which has been stated, and to an extent I can nod my head at it, in terms of they don't want Japan to get into the state where it could be like the Soviet Union, in terms of you have a societal collapse and then a whole different regime can take power before the Americans get there. That would then be a danger. And then obviously, Stalin's moving huge bulk of his Red Army from the west to the east. But crucially, he's hardly got a navy. And you said it yourself, the US Pacific Fleet was huge in order to land on Japan. Stalin didn't have that, and he'd still have to do the same as the Americans, get across the sea to get onto mainland Japan. Personally, I think he'd have to spend at least a year to prepare for that. So I don't think there was a danger of a Red Scare of the Soviets taking northern Japan. He'd have to get over then, he wouldn't have got there.
So when it comes to the decision to drop, I mean, it's seen as to stop, to stop this, because the campaign to take the home islands it's far too costly. As I said before, there's not the willingness, I suppose, amongst the Marine Corps and whatever for this slaughter. I mean, they've already been through some 44 amphibious landings or whatever. Every scene, like I said, every scene that footage, but the shock and awe that it actually, as to accuse a desert was storm freeze. It must have been bewilderment from everybody, because nobody saw that. Obviously the public didn't know this. So this whole the explosion itself, and then quote unquote the fallout from afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, they were shocked, and obviously communications were in the main destroyed around the city. There were still a couple of phone lines intact, because the main army HQ just outside the city was under a mountain, which saved the commander, Field Marshal Hatter. There was bewilderment, confusion, but they knew they'd been hit by some super weapon. They just obviously didn't know it was a nuclear weapon. And then they sent teams down within a couple of days. Medical teams will get... The reaction was quick. Within 2 to 3 days, they had teams in there that were trying to get the water back on, because obviously all facilities are destroyed. Most of the fire teams are dead. 23 out of 24 hospitals flattened. Most of the survivors have fled to the mountains surrounding the city. It's just a dystopian nightmare. But they did manage to get people in. And then obviously it's getting reported back to military command in Tokyo. They've used a wonder weapon. But then the Americans are telling them, because obviously President Truman gives his radio address where he famously coins the phrase, if you do not accept our declaration that we gave for for unconditional surrender from Potsdam, you will face a reign of ruin. And that's not just a firebombing campaign continuing, which he carried on doing, is we'll drop another bomb. Because I suppose the thing is, the Japanese don't know that the Americans have only got 2 bombs with potentially another one that they can get shipped there by the 19th of August. They might think, well, they've got a whole range of them. So there's that too. So the bewilderment then turned to, I would argue, resilience amongst the Japanese leadership, because you've got to remember, it's much like when you look at that film with Hitler in the bunker.
Downfall. Yeah,
these guys, they're in it to win it. It's all or nothing for them, and part of it is we want to keep the entity of the emperor, the divine office of the emperor here. The Allies' declaration at Potsdam was, well, we're not guaranteeing that. And so that was one of their other reasons for fighting. And they've had 25 years of being inculcated in this, doctrine of Bushido, where it's all or nothing. We're going to go down fighting. The slogan that was going around Japan was the sacrifice of 100 million. They were preparing it. Whether they would have done it, who knows? But that's what Truman was looking at.
If you look at things like Saipan and people are throwing themselves off cliffs, for example, that's and there's the civilians, because they're being told they're going to be eaten or they're going to be put into slavery or all sorts of.
Well, some of the Japanese I interviewed, they said that the first time they realised the war was going badly was when the emperor announces they're surrendering. Yeah, they had because Japanese propaganda was so watertight in the country. They're not telling them about what's going on the islands, how they're losing them one by one. Again, in Hiroshima, the only way, which is, I talk about the mayor who died instantly, Senkichi, he realizes the war's going badly, and you see it in his letters and memoirs, because he gets travel permits to go back up to Tokyo, where he's from, where his family still resides, and he sees the damage of the Great Tokyo Fire Raid, and he thinks, well, why don't people know about this? Because, they've absolutely ravaged the capital. And he comes back down to Hiroshima to continue being in charge of the city with this foreboding, as in, why have we been spared? He asks that, why have we been spared? And obviously there was a reason for that.
How difficult is it to flesh out people like the mayor of Hiroshima? Because it's from a Western perspective, we very normally see that it's 2-dimensional, and these are, they're not the enemy, they're not 2-dimensional. I can't to stress this point, because a lot of cinema has just gone, oh, it's the Japanese. Well, I was going to say, because obviously I'm giving talks at the moment in bookshops and festivals, and I was in a bookshop last Wednesday, and there was a squaddy sitting front and centre of literally right in front of me on the front row, arms crossed for the whole talk. And obviously my Spider-Man senses were tingling. I thought, I'm going to get a question asked here. And I'm completely happy to debate with anyone. I'm just giving them, this is all my research, 3 years of research. You see what you think from it, read the book. And he said, are you trying to make us feel sorry for the Japanese for what happened to them? Because that's the equivalent of me being told I need to feel sorry for the Taliban that I fought for, and I dropped, I saw my friends being killed, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, it's not as simplistic as that. I said, it's, you still, I'm showing you my research of how I've interviewed Americans and what they felt after the war about what they'd done. Some of them thought it was good, some of them thought it was bad. And equally with the Japanese, as you just said, it's not 2-dimensional. Not the whole of Japan was gung-ho crazy, let's die for the emperor. There's lots of layers of people worrying about, can I feed my kids? Why is my son still working in an armaments factory? Why haven't we been evacuated from the city? Where's the emperor? All that kind of stuff. It just gives you an accurate tapestry to think, okay, I can then decide, they had it coming to them. We had to bomb them, or we weren't going to break them. Or maybe I should feel like it was a step too far.
and it's for them to decide.
When you talk about, you actually get primary sources, because we are losing, obviously, it's 80 years. Of course, we're going to be losing those who, that several have. So it must be, you go to those who you still can, although their memory may have been clouded. Because again, if it's not primary, if it's not at the time, the narrative can change because they know how it works. But also to get diaries and letters from those who are no longer with us. For example, the Mirror of Hiroshima must be help you to put this together.
Well, quickly, I was going to say the narrative does change. And one of the ones that's really striking is if you've read books on the Enola Gay dropping the bomb, but Paul Tibbets, who was flying it, his co-pilot, Captain Lewis, is famous for saying in his log, he wrote down, "Oh, my God, what have we done?" Now, you and I know as a legacy, that's amazing. But then when I went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, it's an incredible museum. If any of your listeners want to, you should go because it's incredible. It's fantastic. And it houses thousands upon thousands of oral testimonies from all elements of the US military in the war. And it's got all the crew interviewed from the Enola Gay. And the bombardier said, well, Lewis only wrote that in the log once we'd landed back on Tinian and were surrounded by the US press. What he actually said, he shouted out, "Look at that son of a bitch go."
Right.
And that's what I mean by primary sources. And I say that in the book too. But no, you're right. It's probably interviewed a dozen people, both sides. And when I went to Japan, as I said at the top of the show, I think the best interview is Michiko Kodama. And she was 88 when I interviewed her. She's 90 this year. She is now the Assistant Secretary General of the Nihon Hidanko's, the Atomic Survivors. And again, I just wanted to tell her story. And she's just won the Nobel Peace Prize as well. But I interviewed a 101-year-old US Marine who survived Iwo Jima because I thought it's great to capture his voice, as you said, about the barbarity of the fighting, just on both sides, just how intense, and just for a small island, and what the US Marines suffered just to take this small island. It was good to capture his voice because it's a stepping stone. It's in the story arc. You have to understand the journey to realize why they wanted to use the atomic bomb. It's very easy to understand once you see the story arc. Luckily, bless him, there's a veteran of Tibbets bomber group, the 509, the ones that trained to drop the atomic bomb. They have they're like Band of Brothers. They're very tight, and they just have loads and loads and loads of reunions. And their archivist is still alive, and he just turned over the archive and just said, "Look, here's all the interviews I've done with them over the years. See what you think." And some of their voices are dropped in as well. And obviously, pretty much to a man, they all wanted to do it.
Yeah,
they were an elite unit. They thought this will end the war. And that's what I mean. And you said it, because I think you understand this. If we put ourselves in their shoes, they just want to finish the war. It's just been a terrible war. Yeah. It's decimated the whole of the Pacific Basin, and they just want to get it finished. And these guys still will not surrender. What are they going to do? And so that, again, I think it just needs to be about the understanding.
I could talk to you about this probably till Friday this week, so you can probably tell, Ian. But I've got 1 minute and 1 minute left. So what are you hoping? What are you hoping that people are going to learn from the book? They enjoy the read because I'm a writer, and I hope I've told a good story. I've tried to tell it in a very cinematic fashion because it's a lot of vignettes that's just dropping you into pivotal moments. And I just hope they get a balanced idea of, because obviously it's bang up to date in terms of what's going on at the moment, and everyone's worried about what's going on in Europe and what's going to go on between Pakistan and India. And just take from it where do we think we're going with nuclear technology in the modern age? And how did we get there? And I'm hoping that this story is the first step in that. If people, listeners, you can order the book via our own virtual bookstore. Just click on the link. If people want to say nice things to you online, Ian, where's the best place to find you?
www.iainmacgregor.com.
That's what it says on the tin. The book is called The Hiroshima Men, or Hiroshima Men, excuse me. It's by Iain MacGregor. Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you.